Before you scroll past this, I need you to understand something that 94% of Americans are still getting dangerously wrong. And as of today, June 2nd, 2026, there is a mechanism that was quietly activated 5 months ago that almost nobody is talking about openly. I have been tracking this for 8 months. What I am about to walk you through is not speculation. It is documented, it is sourced, and it is happening right now to people who thought they had nothing to worry about. Here is what I want you to picture. You sell a car, you receive money from your children, you move your own savings from one bank to another. Perfectly normal, completely legal, you have done nothing wrong. And yet, every single one of those actions may now be generating a paper trail that runs deeper than you have ever been told. The report is not the danger. What you do next is, if you are watching this and you have money sitting in any American bank account, what I am about to reveal in the next 20 minutes could be the most important financial information you hear this year. Hit subscribe right now and do not go anywhere, because this only gets more serious from here. Let me give you the full picture first, because most people who cover this topic hand you a piece of the puzzle and call it the whole thing. That is not what we are doing here. Cast your mind back to 1970. The Bank Secrecy Act gets signed into law. The idea was straightforward: require banks to report large cash transactions so the government could track money laundering and organized crime. Simple enough, reasonable enough. That was 56 years ago. Here is what nobody is doing the math on. $10,000 in 1970 had the purchasing power of roughly $80,000 today. Think about what that means. The threshold that was designed to flag serious, significant cash movements, the kind associated with drug trafficking and organized crime, has not moved a single dollar since the day it was written. But inflation has, every single year, for 5.5 decades. So what are we actually looking at right now? We are looking at a system that was built to monitor transactions equivalent to $80,000, but is currently triggering on transactions worth 1/8 of that in real terms. The government is watching at a level that would have been considered absurdly intrusive by the very people who designed this law. Do you see what has happened here? Now here is where I need you to pay close attention, because this is the part that changes everything. In 2024 alone, American financial institutions filed more than 20.5 million currency transaction reports and nearly 3.8 million suspicious activity reports. That is an average of 56,000 reports filed every single day. Every day. 365 days a year. And yet, according to a Government Accountability Office report published in December of 2024, law enforcement actually accessed only 5.4% of those currency transaction reports. 5.4%. That means roughly 95% of those reports sit in a federal database, unseen, untouched, but available, ready to be pulled the moment someone decides to look at your account. I am not here to frighten you without reason. I am here because the gap between what this system was designed to do and what it is currently capable of doing is wider than most Americans realize. And that gap has consequences, real ones, for real people. Here is where it gets significantly more serious. On December 1st, 2025, something changed. And I want to be precise about this because the details matter enormously. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a bureau inside the United States Treasury, quietly activated a new mandatory reporting requirement, not for banks this time, for real estate professionals, agents, attorneys, settlement companies, anyone involved in closing a residential property transaction that is transferred to a legal entity or a trust without bank financing is now required to file a report directly with FinCEN. Let me say that again slowly, because I want this to land. If your parents sell their home, paid in full, no mortgage, clean transaction, and they transfer the proceeds into a family trust or an LLC to pass it to you, there is now a mandatory federal report generated, not by the bank, by the real estate professional handling the closing. Before December 1st, 2025, no report. After December 1st, 2025, federal report. Same family, same money, same intention. Completely different paper trail. Now ask yourself this question. How many people buying, selling, or transferring property right now are aware of this? How many estate planning attorneys sat down with their clients in January of 2026 and walked them through exactly what changed? Based on what I have been tracking, the answer is far fewer than should have. And here is where I need you to zoom out with me for a moment, because this does not exist in isolation. What we now have, as of today, June 2nd, 2026, is a layered surveillance architecture around American financial life that did not exist 5 years ago in its current form. You have currency transaction reports from banks. You have suspicious activity reports from banks and financial institutions. You have Form 8300 from businesses receiving cash over $10,000. And now you have real estate transfer reports from property professionals. 4 separate reporting channels, 4 separate data streams, all flowing into the same federal network. I am not telling you this system was designed with malicious intent. I genuinely am not making that claim. What I am telling you, based on publicly available records and agency documentation, is that the architecture of financial monitoring around ordinary Americans has expanded significantly, and the expansion in December of 2025 was not front-page news anywhere. That absence of coverage is itself worth paying attention to. The question I keep returning to is a simple one. When a government expands its financial reporting infrastructure in the final months of one year, right before a major legislative debate about raising reporting thresholds begins in the next, what is the most reasonable interpretation of that sequence? I am not answering that for you. I am asking you to think about it. Now I need to slow down here, because this section is the mechanical heart of everything we are discussing. And if you do not understand how these 3 pieces interact, nothing else I tell you will make complete sense. Let us start with the currency transaction report. Your bank files one automatically anytime you conduct a cash transaction exceeding $10,000 in a single business day. You do not sign anything. You do not get notified. The bank has 15 calendar days to submit it electronically to FinCEN, and they are required to keep records for 5 years. That is the machinery running quietly in the background of every significant cash transaction in America. Here is the critical context that most coverage leaves out. 87% of banks surveyed by the American Bankers Association reported they did not receive a single follow-up inquiry about any currency transaction report they filed in 2023, a year in which they collectively filed more than 20 million of them. The currency transaction report by itself is largely administrative. It is paperwork moving through a system that is, statistically speaking, not watching most of it. But the suspicious activity report is an entirely different animal. A suspicious activity report has no simple dollar trigger the way a currency transaction report does. Technically, banks are required to file when transactions aggregate $5,000 or more and involve a known suspect, or $25,000 or more when no suspect has been identified. But here is what that technical description obscures. Banks are permitted to file a suspicious activity report on any transaction at any amount if their monitoring systems flag behavior that looks like an attempt to avoid detection. And the monitoring systems are sophisticated. They are not looking at individual transactions. They are reading patterns across time. $9,000 on a Monday, $8,500 on a Thursday, $9,200 the following Tuesday. The algorithm does not see 3 separate deposits. It sees one deliberate sequence, that is structuring. And under Title 31, United States Code, Section 5324, structuring is a federal crime, not a civil infraction, not a fine. A federal crime carrying up to 5 years in prison and up to $250,000 in fines for amounts under $100,000 in a 12-month period. I need you to hear the part that should genuinely disturb you. You do not need dirty money. You do not need fraudulent intent. You do not need to be connected to any other illegal activity whatsoever. If your money is completely clean, every dollar legally earned, legally inherited, legally gifted, and you deliberately break it into smaller deposits to stay below the threshold, you have committed a federal offense. The source of the money is irrelevant to the charge. And then there is civil asset forfeiture, the mechanism that almost nobody explains accurately. The government does not need a criminal conviction to seize your funds. They do not need to charge you with a crime. Between 2005 and 2012, the IRS seized more than $242 million across more than 2,500 structuring cases. 1/3 of those cases involved nothing beyond a pattern of sub-$10,000 deposits. Nothing else. The median amount seized nationally was $1,276 per person. These were not cartel operations. These were ordinary Americans who made one category of mistake. They tried to manage how their money looked going into the bank, without understanding that the management itself was the crime. Pause on that, because that is the entire trap in one sentence. Now here is where the story stops being purely legal and starts being something considerably more interesting. On October 21, 2025, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Tim Scott of South Carolina and Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana introduced Senate Bill 3017, the Streamline Act. The full name is the Streamlining Transaction Reporting and Ensuring Anti-Money Laundering Improvements for a New Era Act. The headline proposal is straightforward enough. Raise the currency transaction report threshold from $10,000 to $30,000. Raise suspicious activity report thresholds proportionally. Index everything to inflation going forward and adjust every 5 years. On the surface, this reads as common sense modernization. And in many respects, the underlying argument is legitimate. $10,000 in 1970 represents nearly $80,000 in today's purchasing power. The threshold has been eroded by inflation into something that was never its original intent. Supporters, including major banking trade groups, credit unions, and the Independent Community Bankers of America, lined up quickly with strong public endorsements. But I want you to hold two things in your mind simultaneously here, because this is where the analysis gets genuinely complicated. The first thing, if the threshold rises to $30,000, a meaningful portion of ordinary Americans conducting legitimate cash business will no longer generate automatic federal reports. That is a real benefit to real people. I am not dismissing it. The second thing, according to analysis from Nasdaq Verifin, one of the leading financial crime detection firms in the country, raising the threshold does not eliminate structuring. It relocates it. The people who were deliberately depositing $9,900 will simply begin depositing $29,900. The compliance burden for banks does not disappear. It recalibrates, and the people most likely to recalibrate quickly are precisely the people the system was originally designed to catch. Meanwhile, in February of 2026, Representative Tim Walberg reintroduced the FAIR Act, the Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, which would raise the evidentiary standard required before the government can seize private property and would specifically reform the IRS structuring statute to add protections for small business owners. Two bills, running simultaneously, one expanding the threshold at which surveillance begins, one limiting what the government can do once it has acted on that surveillance. Here is the analytical question I cannot answer for you, but believe you deserve to sit with. If both bills pass tomorrow in their current form, who benefits most? The retired school teacher with $20,000 in cash savings? Or the sophisticated operator who already understands exactly where every new line is drawn? I genuinely do not know the full answer to that question. And I am suspicious of anyone who tells you they do. And it starts with the names. Because when ordinary voters leave a party, the media can ignore it. They can wave it away. They can call it a fringe movement, a blip, a nothing burger. But when sitting justices and Harvard law professors start walking out the door, that is a different story entirely. That is the kind of defection that cannot be explained away. Here is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice David Wecht, a lifelong Democrat, a man who built his entire legal career inside that party, just announced he is leaving, effective immediately, and he did not go quietly. He went on record, publicly, with a devastating explanation, his breaking point, the Democrat Party's open tolerance of anti-Semitism. He specifically called out Maine's likely Democrat Senate nominee, a man who was discovered to have a literal Nazi symbol tattooed on his body. And rather than condemn it, rather than draw a line, the party minimized it, coddled it, looked the other way. Wecht's verdict was brutal and simple. This is no longer the party he once knew. But that is not even the most shocking part. Because almost simultaneously, legendary Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, one of the most recognizable legal minds in America, made it official. He is no longer a Democrat, he is now a Republican. And in a Wall Street Journal op-ed, he delivered a line that cut straight to the bone. He did not leave the party left him. Think about what that means. Dershowitz spent his entire career championing due process, free speech, and civil liberties under the Democrat banner. And now he says that party simply does not exist anymore. It has been taken over, radicalized. And his final straw was the same as Vechts, a party where polling now shows 70% of Democrats siding with groups aligned with Hamas and Hezbollah over a Democratic ally. Two giants, two devastating exits, one identical conclusion. But these names, as explosive as they are just the surface, because underneath them, something far larger is happening, something that cannot be explained by individual conscience or personal courage, something that looks less like a few high-profile exits and more like a party in freefall. This is not a coincidence. This is a collapse. Here is the number the Democrat Party does not want you to see. For every single Republican who switches to the Democrat Party, 4 Democrats switch to the Republican Party, 4-1. That ratio is not a talking point. That is a structural hemorrhage. And it has been running consistently, quietly, devastatingly in the background while the media pretends everything is fine. But it goes even deeper than party registration, because Americans are not just switching their political affiliation. They are physically leaving, picking up their lives, their businesses, their families, and fleeing blue states entirely. New York City alone is projected to lose up to $12 billion in GDP as businesses escape the crushing weight of new wealth and business taxes. $12 billion gone. Fleeing to Texas, to Florida, to Tennessee, to North and South Carolina, states that are not just surviving, they are absolutely booming. And here is why that matters beyond the economy. Every single person who leaves New York or California and moves to a red state is one less Democrat voter in a blue state and one more Republican-leaning resident in a red state. The Census Bureau keeps score. And according to projections for the 2030 reapportionment, blue states are on track to lose somewhere between 12 and 16 electoral votes and congressional seats. The map is being redrawn, not by politicians, not by courts, by the people themselves. But all of that, the names, the ratios, the migration, it is just a prelude, because the numbers we are about to show you are the ones that will make Democrat strategists lose sleep tonight. Now here is where the story stops being purely legal and starts being something considerably more interesting. On October 21st, 2025, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Tim Scott of South Carolina and Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana introduced Senate Bill 3017, the Streamline Act. The full name is the Streamlining Transaction, Reporting and Ensuring Anti-Money Laundering Improvements for a New Era Act. The headline proposal is straightforward enough. Raise the currency transaction report threshold from $10,000 to $30,000. Raise suspicious activity report thresholds proportionally. Index everything to inflation going forward and adjust every 5 years. On the surface, this reads as common sense modernization. And in many respects, the underlying argument is legitimate. $10,000 in 1970 represents nearly $80,000 in today's purchasing power. The threshold has been eroded by inflation into something that was never its original intent. Supporters, including major banking trade groups, credit unions, and the Independent Community Bankers of America, lined up quickly with strong public endorsements. But I want you to hold two things in your mind simultaneously here, because this is where the analysis gets genuinely complicated. The first thing, if the threshold rises to $30,000, a meaningful portion of ordinary Americans conducting legitimate cash business will no longer generate automatic federal reports. That is a real benefit to real people. I am not dismissing it. The second thing, according to analysis from Nasdaq Verafin, one of the leading financial crime detection firms in the country, raising the threshold does not eliminate structuring. It relocates it. The people who were deliberately depositing $9,900 will simply begin depositing $29,900. The compliance burden for banks does not disappear, it recalibrates. And the people most likely to recalibrate quickly are precisely the people the system was originally designed to catch. Meanwhile, in February of 2026, Representative Tim Walberg reintroduced the FAIR Act, the Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, which would raise the evidentiary standard required before the government can seize private property and would specifically reform the IRS structuring statute to add protections for small business owners. Two bills, running simultaneously, one expanding the threshold at which surveillance begins, one limiting what the government can do once it has acted on that surveillance. Here is the analytical question I cannot answer for you, but believe you deserve to sit with. If both bills pass tomorrow in their current form, who benefits most? The retired school teacher with $20,000 in cash savings, or the sophisticated operator who already understands exactly where every new line is drawn? I genuinely do not know the full answer to that question, and I am suspicious of anyone who tells you they do. Now, I want to do something that a lot of channels covering this topic simply refuse to do. I want to give the other side its full and honest hearing, because if I do not, I am not analyzing. I am just amplifying. Here is the strongest case for the system as it currently exists. The Bank Secrecy Act framework has produced real results in serious cases. Financial intelligence derived from suspicious activity reports has contributed to prosecutions involving human trafficking networks, terrorist financing, large-scale fraud operations, and transnational organized crime. These are not hypothetical benefits. Law enforcement agencies have documented specific investigations where Bank Secrecy Act data was the thread that unraveled genuinely dangerous operations. That record deserves acknowledgement. FinCEN and Treasury would also argue, with some justification, that the sheer volume of reporting creates a searchable historical record. Even if only 5.4% of currency transaction reports are actively accessed in real time, the database exists as an investigative resource that can be pulled retroactively when a pattern becomes relevant to a larger case. The value, they would say, is not always immediate. Those are legitimate arguments. I hold them seriously. But here is where the Government Accountability Office, not me, not an advocacy group, but the nonpartisan investigative arm of the United States Congress, drew its own conclusion in December of 2024. After reviewing 167 million currency transaction reports filed between 2014 and 2023, the Government Accountability Office formally recommended raising the reporting threshold and reducing what it called unnecessary filings that provide limited utility to law enforcement. When the government's own auditors tell you the system is generating more noise than signal, that is not a fringe critique. That is an institutional admission. The system is not without purpose, but purpose and proportionality are two separate questions. And right now, the honest answer is that we have not fully resolved the second one. Let me show you the numbers that nobody is putting together in one place, because when you line them up side by side, something becomes very difficult to ignore. Start with the inflation calculation. $10,000 in 1970 carries the purchasing power of approximately $80,000 in 2026. That means the reporting threshold, measured in real economic terms, has drifted to roughly $1,200 in 1970 equivalent value. The government is currently mandating federal reports on transactions that, by the original intent of the lawmakers who wrote this law, would not have come anywhere close to triggering scrutiny. Not even close. Now layer in the enforcement data. From 2005 through 2012, the Internal Revenue Service seized more than $242 million across more than 2,500 structuring cases. 1/3 of those cases, verified by the Institute for Justice through federal records, involved nothing beyond a pattern of deposits under $10,000. No drug trafficking connection, no fraud, no underlying criminal enterprise of any kind. Just a pattern of deposits. The median amount seized per person nationally sits at $1,276. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $1,276. That is not the profile of sophisticated money laundering. That is the profile of a small business owner, a retiree, a tradesperson who handles cash and simply did not know the rules. And here is the dimension that makes this structurally troubling rather than merely unfortunate. When a bank files a suspicious activity report, it carries no legal liability for filing incorrectly. When the government initiates a civil forfeiture proceeding, it does not require a criminal conviction to take your money. And when your funds are seized, the legal burden of proving your money is clean falls substantially on you, not on the agency that took it. The system, as designed, places the weight of proof on the person with the fewest resources to carry it. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a description of how the legal mechanics actually function, documented in federal statutes, confirmed in court decisions, and acknowledged in part by the Government Accountability Office report that landed quietly in December of 2024 and received almost no mainstream coverage whatsoever. Do with that what you will. Everything I have walked you through today could feel overwhelming. I understand that. But I want to end this section with something concrete because knowledge without action is just anxiety with better vocabulary. Here are 5 things you can do before you go to sleep tonight. First, create a folder, physical or digital, whichever you are comfortable with, and label it Transaction Records. Every time you handle a cash transaction above $3,000, write one sentence describing the source and date it. Second, if you have sold or are planning to sell residential property through a trust or a legal entity since December of 2025, speak with a qualified attorney specifically about the new FinCEN real estate reporting requirements. This is not optional anymore. Third, if you need to move a large sum between accounts, move it once, in full, and keep the transfer confirmation. Do not break it into convenient smaller amounts, ever. Fourth, if a bank teller asks about a large deposit, answer briefly and honestly. One sentence. Hand over whatever documentation you have, nothing more. Fifth, if you ever receive written correspondence from FinCEN, the Department of Justice, or the Internal Revenue Service regarding your banking activity, do not respond independently. 5 words only, I need my attorney present.